welcome to the second of our live coding demonstrations with the UK Data Service. My name is Dermot MacDonald. I'm a research fellow at the University of Birmingham, but formerly of the UK Data Service. And with my colleague Julia Kazmaier today, who will be helping me facilitate. We'll be going through some of the materials we developed for our social network analysis webinar series. This was a series of three webinars, so some kind of lectures and some live demonstrations and some further teaching materials, etc. The purpose of these two coding demonstrations, the previous one was 2 weeks ago, if you were unable to join us, is to just go a bit more hands-on with the actual coding involved in doing social network analysis. So we're going to take our time today for about half an hour, 35 minutes, and we're going to get stuck into using Python to do some social network analysis. So if you're completely new to Python or completely new to social network analysis, then today is kind of aimed at you. We won't teach you Python from scratch, but we'll show you some basic commands and some basic coding that you can use. And today we're going to focus on getting some social network data, specifically Twitter data. That's what we're going to do today. So again, thank you very much. If you have questions as we go along today, then please type them into YouTube if you're signed in. I'd encourage you to sign in just so you can leave comments, but of course not a necessity. Today really you can just watch what I'm doing and you can execute the exact same code at the same time as we go through today's session. So my brilliant assistant Julia should be posting the link to the materials we're going to use today. As I say, you can execute the exact same code that I'm using. We're all going to use an online version that's openly available to anybody. And where you can find it, if you're unfamiliar with what we've done before, is the UK Data Service has a profile on a platform called GitHub. This is a coding repository so people can share their code and work on it collaboratively. The data service has its own profile, and underneath we've got lots of different training series that we've done before. So we've done some text mining, we've done some introduction to Python, code demos, we've done some web scraping, etc. So today we're going to do some social network analysis. So you don't need to worry about the link just now. Julia has posted a link in the chat box, so you can just go directly to that. So we've got a lot of different materials. We've got some advice on installing Python on your machine, a reading list, some webinars that you could watch if you want to get into some of the theory of social network analysis. But today we're just going to get straight into the actual coding itself. So basically we're going to launch what are called Jupyter notebooks. If you're unfamiliar with what these are, you can think of them like regular paper notebooks where you can write in whatever language you want, whatever language you write or speak in. Jupyter notebooks are electronic notebooks where you can write different programming languages. So today we're going to use Python, but if you were more of an OR user, you could write OR code in this notebook. If you were a quote-unquote a proper programmer, you could write in C#, Visual Basic, Julia, lots of different languages you can use as well. So if you click the link, you should see something, a screen very similar. Basically, I've just made the repository live. So now it's a live coding repository and we can start executing our Python code. So last week, if you joined us, we kind of looked at some kind of fundamental concepts and techniques of analysis in social network analysis as a field. Today, I realized we probably advertised today as doing the analysis, but since I did it 2 weeks ago, today we're going to focus on getting some social network data, again, specifically Twitter. So what we want to do is when we get this view here, we want the UKDS SNA getting data notebook. So we just want to click on this notebook here, and that should launch the code that we're going to use today. Excellent. So this is a Jupyter notebook. This is what we use to develop our training series. As you can see, they're openly available and they're interactive, so not only will you be able to execute the code today, but you can change it however you like, and it'll always remain, unedited and unchanged. So any changes you make today, you can, go to File and you can go to Save As, and you can download your own copy with your own changes. But this version we have right in front of us now will always remain unedited on the repository, and you can launch this whenever you want. If you make mistakes and you delete everything, you can just go back, relaunch it using the link we've given you, and go again. So what we want to do is there's lots of material on background and kind of concepts. Today we just want to get stuck in to the code. So in the table of contents, just at the beginning of the notebook, we want to go to section 4, so collecting social network data. So if you've got this notebook to launch, then again, feel free to work through it yourself and execute the code in sync with me. If you haven't got it launched, then don't worry too much about the link. As I said, it's all there for you to practice later, and you can just follow what I'm doing just now. Excellent. So we want to go to section 4. I've just been told there's a little bit of echo on my end. It's to do with the completely bare room that I'm in. No carpet, no furniture, so I don't think there's much I can do at the moment about that. Apologies. Excellent. So we're in section 4 of the notebook, and this is how we interact with it. So a notebook is made up of 3 different types of cells. So if we click on this heading here, you can see that the cell is highlighted. If we double click on it, we can see that it's just basically a cell for typing in text. So I can say this is a text cell. If you want to execute it, you can go to the run button here, and that basically just executes the cell, so it just prints the text in a slightly formatted manner. If I double click again, I can just delete the text that I just put in. And once again, I can click run, or if you've got a keyboard in front of you, you can do Control Enter. So CTRL and the carriage return or the enter button, and that executes the cell also. We're not going to do any typing of text today, we're more interested in the code. So what you'll see here is this kind of grayed out cell with an IN square parentheses. That indicates that it's a code cell, so IN stands for input, so the notebook wants you to type some Python code into it. So that's what we're going to begin with now. So if you're using Python to do some social network analysis, so if that's doing the actual analysis itself, collecting data, etc., anytime you launch Python, no matter how you use it, you basically have to import all the functions and commands that you need for this session into your Python instance. So today we're using a Jupyter Notebook. All of these different commands and packages, they're all installed on the machine or online, but you basically have to tell Python, hey, bring this into this session, I need to execute these commands today. So good thing about Python is it's quite English language based. It uses simple legible terms to describe commands. So the import command imports the functions that you need for today. So just like the text cell, we can click anywhere on the code cell. You can see it, sometimes it's highlighted in blue, sometimes in green, which means you're in editing mode. So again, I can click the run button or Control Enter on your keyboard. And what we've done is we've asked the notebook to execute the Python code stored in that cell. So if we just get a number in the parentheses, that means that the code is executed successfully. If, for example, we made a typo and then we tried to execute the code, you'll see an error message underneath the code cell. And in this instance, there's no Python module, so there's no set of code or commands called tweepy, the typo that I made. So I'll undo my typo, execute the code again, and now Python has everything it needs to begin collecting Twitter data. And as you've probably noticed, one of the key modules or packages that we need is something specifically written for Twitter data. It's called TweetPy or Tweepy for, I guess it's technically TweetPy, but going to say Tweepy. And we've got a package for handling a particular data format called JSON. We've got a package for working with data sets or data frames in Python called pandas. You've probably come across that before. And we've got a basic module as well for working with dates and times. So this is, apologies if this is teaching you some very rudimentary things that you may already know, but it's important to think of doing any analysis in Python in very sequential logical terms. So you have to get it set up correctly to begin with, and then we can start doing more interesting things. So what we want to do is we want to connect to Twitter's database, otherwise known as an API. This is called an application programming interface. An API is basically like a middleman in between you wanting to request data and the database itself, which actually stores the information you want. It's kind of like a translator or an intermediary. I've also seen an API described as like a plug socket. So the electricity is being provided to your home through the wires. You've got a device on your desk, and it's through the socket that you connect to the electricity supply. So an API is like that. An API is like a socket. I've got my machine here that wants Twitter data. Twitter has its database that stores Twitter data, and we want to connect to it. Very whistle-stop tour of what an API is. Again, we cover it in more detail in our webinar. This is all to say that basically we're connecting to a database. Some databases are completely open, but most restrict access to verified users. So Twitter API is no different. Basically, we have to tell it who we are in order to request data. So we're going to use real Twitter data, so we're going to use my credentials. They're going to be destroyed at the end of this session, so have your fun now. Please don't do anything crazy. But it's reasonably quick. It's something we cover in the webinar, how to register to use the Twitter API. It can take 2 to 3, maybe even 5 days for you to be kind of verified and to be granted access. So if you're in a rush to do your research, then factor that in, that Twitter does actually check the application you make to use its data, but it very rarely stands in the way of academic usage of the data. So for example, there's a file on the repository here. So Twitter API, fake credentials. It's just a little text file with some variables, storing the access token, the secret, etc. What that basically means is that when you want to connect to the Twitter database, you give it your username and you give it your password, and that verifies who you are. So if you execute these commands here, basically I'm opening the file that I just showed you, and I'm loading in the data and storing it in this variable or this Python object called tokens. My username or my consumer key is stored in a field called usefully consumer key, etc. Then I have a little command here that just basically prints the information we've read for the file. So these are fake credentials. So this is me, here's my secret, etc. So we're going to actually load in my real credentials now, so we can actually access Twitter data. So we're going to execute this code cell here. So with the actual proper genuine file open, let's load in the data. So this is basically what we call in the education business a deliberate mistake. As you'll have noticed, if we go back to the real file, I've stored what I need in. So my ID is called the consumer key, and my password is in a field called API key secret. You can see here that I'm looking for a field called API key, which doesn't exist. So I'm just going to update to consumer key, and API key secret is correct. So if I load that in and execute it again, now we don't get any error. So if I, again, just to show what's happening, so if you want to insert your own text or your own coding cell, If you go to the insert option up here, you can insert a cell above or below what you've currently selected. So I'm just going to type a very quick bit of information back to the screen. So I'm going to just say print consumer key. Okay, so I have made. Exactly. Okay, just a moment. So I said that was a deliberate mistake, it was, but I then compounded that with an unintentional mistake. So I need to put up my real Twitter credentials very quickly, and I'll do that just now. Excellent. There we go. So as you can see, they were edited slightly earlier, but I didn't follow through. Let's just double check that that works. I promise once you see what we're actually able to do with Twitter, you'll be very happy that I got this working. So just indulge me very slightly. No, so correct, I didn't actually save my details correctly. So we'll do this very, very quickly. Twitter developer pools. Excellent. I suppose this is somewhat useful. So this shows you, once you actually register to use the Twitter database, you can see kind of your settings and what you're allowed to do. So basically, I set up an application called Charity Tweets. That's what I'm interested in as a researcher. Basically, I need to get my API key and my secret password so that Twitter knows who I am when I request data. And it's quite secure, so you can see it regenerates my user ID and my password each time, so it prevents it kind of acts as a bit of a safety mechanism against people getting hold of your details. So you don't have to worry about any of this, because I'll re-upload this file. I think that's what happened actually. Copied. There we go. That makes more sense. And copy this. Perfect. So I've never worked with live code or children. Okay. So once more, I'll just upload my actual working Twitter credentials, and we should be good to go. Excellent. Okay. So what you might need to do is, because we've opened this Jupyter Notebook, before we made the changes that I've just made, is that you probably will have to launch it again. So you can just click on URL bar at the top and press enter, and that should work. So we'll go back to section 4. Actually the easiest thing is to relaunch everything once more. Yeah, so the original link that Julia posted into the YouTube chat, so if you just click that again, and then basically rebuilds all the Jupyter notebooks from scratch, because we've made a change, and then that should have the proper Twitter credentials file, and yeah, okay. So I'll bore you a little bit about what's going on here, since we've got a tiny bit of time. What we're using is a thing called Binder. Binder is basically a software online service that, if you've got some code, it basically builds a little mini computer online that can execute the code. So if you're working on your machine, you may have installed lots of different packages and programs, etc. You basically bundle all of that up, you host it on Binder, and Binder is able to recreate your computer, basically. Now, not your entire machine and not everything you've ever installed or downloaded, but anything that's specific to a piece of work like this, it can recreate it online for other people to use for free, which is quite good. So that should be us. Hopefully this is all useful for your own sake when you inevitably bump into issues, but I do apologise. That's probably my issue for trying to keep things half secret and half not secret. Yes, so if we go back to section 4 and we reload everything in. So API key should be consumer key, and then we can, apologies. Then we can reload everything in, insert cells above, and we can just hopefully double check that this now works. So what is the consumer key? We're just asking Python to tell us what it is. Okay, now that's much better. That looks like an actual genuine consumer key. And then we can have consumer secret. Yeah, and that looks okay. So now we've got my genuine Twitter credentials. We can connect to the API, the database. We can start getting some Twitter data. Fantastic. So we've got our credentials. The next thing we want to do is pass those credentials to the Twitter database itself. So this is where the Tweepy module in Python comes in. It basically saves you writing a lot of code directly to the Twitter API. So Tweepy has been specifically written to make it much faster, much more efficient, and much easier to connect to Twitter and to request data. So basically it hides a lot of the kind of the more detailed and intermediate level Python code you would need to write, and wraps all of that up into really simple functions and really simple methods that you can use yourself. So for example, if I want to authenticate or validate my access to the Twitter API, what I do here is I call the Tweepy package in Python, and I use its method called application authentication handler, or app AUTH handler for short, and I pass it in my unique user ID and my password, and I store that just for its own sake in a variable called auth, AUTH. So basically I take my credentials here and I pass them into the Twitter API itself. So again, the best thing we can do here is, in case we're confused of what did we pass to who, was the connection made, am I now allowed to request data, let's actually try and request some data. So I've written a little bit of a really simple command here. I'm basically saying, connect to the Twitter API, use the search method, and the query I want to search for is my first name, which is Diarmid, and then I just want to return the first 20 results. And for each search result, show me the text of every tweet. So let's see if this works. Excellent. So I should say that this is live on Twitter at the moment, so if there is any any swear words or anything a bit inappropriate for so there's some words there that maybe shouldn't be in a live demonstration, but it's a live piece of code that we're running, so apologies if you do see something. So basically I just asked Twitter to search through all of the kind of most recent tweets and say, can you find my first name? And it's case insensitive, as you can see, so there's a Twitter user here, it's not me, who's tweeting about Jeremy Clarkson, saying something to him. You can see that there's some Japanese tweets. Apparently there's a manga or anime character who has my first name, which is quite interesting, I think. So, and given that I'm Irish, as you can probably tell, there are some Irish language tweets that mention my name also. So because this is live, I don't really have a very popular or common name, but if we were to rerun this code, it might produce some different results. It doesn't just now, so maybe in a minute we can come back just to show that I'm not, saving these results somewhere and calling them now. In real time, we are actually querying the Twitter API. So that's one of the simplest things we can do. We can just say, here's a piece of text that we're interested in. Twitter, go through recent tweets and give me the first 20 search results that find my name. So for example, let's extend it. Let's say give me the 30 most recent, so it gives us the 20 that we've just seen, plus a longer list here as well. Excellent. So that's just to confirm that we have actually connected to the Twitter API. Again, very simply, we get our credentials, we store those in a file. I think that's the safest thing to do. Then we open the file, read the file, get our credentials, pass it to the Twitter API, and away we can then start using the Twitter API search and kind of analysis methods that are most interesting. Right, so let's get to the good part. So we want to request some more data from the Twitter API. So we can see we can do a very general search of the text contained in tweets, for a certain search term. Let's be more specific. Let's say, give me all the information you have about a certain user. So I'm on Twitter. So remember earlier I created this Python variable or object called API, and that's just basically a variable that stores all of the information needed to connect to the Twitter API. So it's a nice shorthand. I don't basically have to write any of this out ever again, which is quite long. Anytime I want to use the Twitter API, I just call this variable or this object here, and whatever method I'm interested in. So as I said, Tweepy is designed to make it a lot easier and faster to request data. One way is by creating a method called get_user. As the name suggests, get me all the information you have about a given Twitter ID. So my ID is Dermot Mack. So basically I'm asking the Twitter API, tell me everything you know about me. So this is all my publicly available information, so there shouldn't be any secrets. But to begin with, what you can see is some kind of metadata about the request to the API I've just made. But what we're interested in is the actual content or the data itself, and that's always stored in a field called _JSON. So at the moment this is quite difficult to read the way Twitter returns the information. We'll see in a moment how we can take out the information that's of interest, and we can put it into a nice clean data set or data frame. So we'll do that in a moment. But even if we just visually scan the information that's returned, you can see the name that I've given Twitter, my screen name or my my kind of profile name, where I currently am, my former role, which needs updating. Do I have a personal website, etc. When was my account created? 2010. That's interesting. How many times have I liked something? How many times have I tweeted? Tweets are known as statuses in Twitter. And you can see what I've most recently done. So at 5 to 8 this morning was the last time I tweeted. And it was to have an argument about public health, which everyone thinks they're an expert in at the moment, including myself. So you can see there's reams of information returned. Most of it is about my recent tweets, but some of it is quite interesting. Kind of metadata about me as a user, and there's some interesting things about each tweet as well. You can see that I posted from my phone or my laptop, or where was I when I posted it. So there's some quite good information you can get just about users to begin with. As social scientists, or most of you probably are, if you're doing a case study on a given organization, it can be quite good to pull this kind of metadata about users. If we take something a bit more important than myself at the moment, we can see Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, has a Twitter account as well, so we can get the same information returned from him. So his screen name is his full name without a space in between. You can see he doesn't tell you where he is, but I guess we know where he is, which is number 10 Downing Street. A little description of him, who he's Member of Parliament for, and then we can see when he's most recently tweeted. So if we go to the so there's a field called status, and within that are all the tweets that he's recently posted. So you can see the last time he tweeted today was about 10 a.m. Here's the unique ID of the tweet that I posted. And here's the text that he actually posted. So yeah, it's Holocaust Remembrance Day. So his most recent tweet was in honor and in memory of that. But we can keep scrolling back and we can see other tweets that he made. Also, you can see that there's URLs that he's posted in his tweets as well. That can be quite interesting, which we'll have a quick look at as well just now. So that's a very, very quick, just kind of look at requesting basic, search information and some basic user data and user metadata about people on Twitter. And as long as someone's profile is public, which I think it's the best of my knowledge of Twitter, that, there's no such thing really as there are private accounts, but most accounts worth anything or worth following. The public figures, for example, are public, so you can get access to pretty much everything they've said or everything they've shared, for example, or retweeted or liked. So you can do a lot of really powerful stuff with the Twitter database. So we're going to run through a very quick example in my research field. So I'm interested in charities or non-profits, and there's a really kind of venerable and effective UK charity called the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, the RNLI for short. It has a very active Twitter account, which I'm quite interested in. So what I want to do very quickly is I want to kind of pull in as many of its most recent tweets as possible. I want to extract certain fields from those tweets, so certain bits of information that are really interesting, and I want to spit all that information out into a nice kind of clean database and save all of that to a file. So it sounds maybe reasonably complicated, but it's actually quite easy thanks to Python and TweetP. So what I want to do is I want to get the full user timeline. So basically that's not everything that this Twitter account has posted, but it's the couple of thousand most recent tweets that it's made. So just because Twitter has a database doesn't mean that you can access every single scrap of information that Twitter has ever collected about every user. I know we're not all that naive, but you will be surprised sometimes about the restrictions that are put on the data that you can access. So I can't get everything that this charity has ever posted, but I can certainly get quite a lot of its most recent Twitter activity. So again, there's a method called get user_timeline. I pass it a Twitter ID, so this is its profile name on Twitter. And all I'm doing then is saving all of those results to a variable called RNLI recent timeline. And then I just call that variable and say, right, show me what you've actually saved in this variable. So what you can see is we get so many results that we get a little, or in our little output window here, we've got quite a long, elongated scroll. So you can see when I ask for the recent timeline, I'm getting reams and reams of information back. But as I said, not everything it's ever posted. So again, as you can see, the actual kind of data that's returned is in a field called _JSON. So we get some metadata about the most recent tweets. So they tweeted at 20 to 12 earlier today. Here's the unique ID of the tweet. What did they actually say? So in a special New Year's message, or etc., the president of the charity said X, Y, and Z. So we can see that the request we made to the Twitter API was successful, but we've gotten back, at the moment, too much information that we can really read, so we need to handle it a bit better. So basically we've asked for the recent timeline. The recent timeline is basically a list of all the recent tweets that it's made. What we want to do now is employ a bit of programming logic, and we want to loop over the list of results that are returned. And we want to then kind of pick out the relevant fields from the results, and we just want to kind of print what those fields contain. So basically I'm saying for every status in the variable I just created, so in the big list of recent tweets, for every tweet, find the field called created at and find the field called text, and print those back to the screen so we can read them. So basically this is just looping over this big list of results that we just produced, only this time pulling out kind of more readable, more interesting information. So we saw the most recent tweet was just before midday today, UK time. We can see that they posted about an hour, 15 minutes before that, which was in response to someone else. And even in such a very simple thing that we've done here, we're already beginning to see the network aspect of Twitter data. So we can see that they're replying to a Twitter account called this, and they're asking this Twitter account to email the charity directly. So not only have we got two Twitter accounts talking to each other, we've got the possibility that somebody then has actually contacted the charity through a different mechanism, through email. Maybe I'm picking that up to be more than it is, but I'm just trying to show you how we're beginning to see the kind of network or the web of connections simply through one Twitter profile at the moment. So as you can see, they've been reasonably prolific on Twitter, probably 4, 5, 6 tweets per day, typically. Not always the case, but probably on average. And I'd say probably half their tweets are then posting content themselves, and the other half of the time it's replying to people who've contacted them on Twitter as well. And they're able to tweet in Welsh as well, which is quite interesting. Just even to pick one out of reasonably at random. On the 22nd of January, somebody called Emma from this Twitter account seems to have done some fundraising for this charity by, cutting off her hair. So again, one simple act there, we can see a connection between a charity, an individual, and a couple of other fundraising campaigns as well. So this is where my interest comes in, between fundraising campaigns, charities, and donors, and how they're all connected. But I won't wax on about my research area. We'll wrap this coding example up shortly. Yes, so we've created a variable called RNLI recent timeline, and that contains, as I said, about 3,500 of its most recent tweets. We'll get the exact number just now. So basically I want to kind of filter through that list and extract the information that I'm interested in solely, because as you can tell, there's a lot of metadata, there's a lot of stuff I'm not particularly interested in just now, but you may be interested in other bits of information also. So what I want to do is I want to create a new list. So I'm creating a blank list, which is what I'm doing here. So square brackets in Python means you're creating a new variable of the list type. So it's going to store comma separated values basically. And then into this list, I want to take out the JSON field. So remember, as I said before, when we make a request to the Twitter API, there's a little bit of metadata returned, but actually the content of what you're asking for is in a field called underscore JSON. So that's all I'm doing here, creating a blank list, and for every tweet in the user timeline, I'm basically saying, give me the JSON field. So we'll execute that code there. It'll probably take, probably 25, maybe 30 seconds. When you're using Jupyter notebooks, if you go up to the tab in which you're running the notebook, you'll see a little hourglass. If there's an hourglass figure or symbol in the tab, that means that the notebook is still actually executing code. So just if you ever execute a cell and you're like, nothing's happening, is it frozen? Odds are it's not frozen at all, it's just some commands take a little longer than others. The other way you can tell is if you go to the cell that you just executed, in the square brackets there'll be an asterisk, meaning it's still processing. And as soon as it's replaced by a number and there's no error message, then you know it's executed successfully. And what the number means is that's the order of code cells that you've run. So this is the 14th code cell that I've run today. So how do we know that works? So as I said, I've created a new list. A good thing about a list is you can ask the list how long it is, so how many elements are in the list. So in Python I use the length method, and I say how long is the list? Yeah, and as I said before, there's about 3,230 tweets, recent tweets that it's found. for that charity that I'm interested in. Another way then to look at the list is every element in the list is numbered. The numbers begin at 0, which may be somewhat confusing given that we usually count from 1. In Python you count from 0, so the first element in the list is element 0. So that's why I have a 0 in this field here. And you can see what I've actually then populated my list with. It's all the information in that JSON field. So here's the tweet, here's the date it was created at. Again, this is information that we've seen previously, but as you can tell now, I've kind of stripped away all the metadata and the stuff I'm not terribly interested in, and just focused on information about each tweet. Again, I would advise you just to play around with the results that are returned, because as you can tell, there's so much. A lot of it is very intuitive if you use Twitter. For example, so we've got information on every tweet. So this is the unique ID of this tweet. Here was when it was posted, and here is how many times it was retweeted. So that's a measure of engagement, or again networking, who's been retweeting. And here's how many times that tweet was liked. And it occurs to me actually that it's probably worth pulling this up in real time on Twitter itself, just very quickly. So if I look for the RNLI, just to show again, just to prove that we're not making this up and that we're connecting. Yeah, so here's the first tweet that we keep seeing. So in our special New Year's message, the President, so President, His Royal Highness, so retweeted 18 times and liked 62 times. Our information is obviously slightly out of date because we made the request 5, 6, 7 minutes ago. So again, hopefully that's just show you that we're getting real-time information here from the Twitter database, which is really interesting. So final thing we want to do, and then I promise we're done with this, is I want to create a new list, and this time I just want to put in certain variables, certain bits of information in this list. So very simply, all I want is for every tweet, all I want is the created at field, so I know when it was posted. I want the unique ID, because with the unique ID, there's other Twitter API methods where I can say, give me all the information for that specific tweet, for example. That's important because when Twitter data gets shared, so if you're doing an academic paper, there obviously are some personal information concerns with just sharing all of the information that we've just requested here ourselves. What tends to happen is if you write an academic paper based on Twitter data, what you'd end up sharing is a list of all the tweet IDs that underpin your analysis. So the whole point then is that you're not technically sharing personal data or confidential or sensitive data. What you're doing is saying, okay, here's the genuine list of all the tweets underpinning my analysis, and it's up to you to go get the underlying information yourself, and then it's your responsibility because you're the one who's downloaded personal data, and it's up to you to manage it correctly. So it's a technique called rehydrating Twitter data. So you get a list of unique IDs of users or tweets, and it's up to you to kind of rehydrate or refresh that information yourself. So sorry, it's a bit of a diversion, but it's just some terminology you might come across. And then I want the actual content of the tweet, which is in the text field. And again, I just want to, and I'm just storing those 3 fields basically in a new kind of row or a new observation called status info, and then I append that row to the blank list that I've created. Again, the kind of proof is in the pudding. It's easier to actually see this when I actually show you the results. So I have a new kind of data set called RNLI underscore data, and I'm asking for the first 5 rows or the first 5 elements of that data set. And you can see row 1 has the date field, the ID field, and content, and here's the actual information for that tweet. Here's the second row, second piece of information, or the second observation, and the 3 fields that we want, etc. So again, remember, Python counts from 0, so that's kind of element or row 1. We can ask it for 10 fields to return, yeah, doesn't really matter. This is just to show you how it looks. So what I'm going to do here is, this is how you would save the information, say to your machine, for example. Because we're working with the online version of this notebook, we don't kind of have like permission to save to the repository online, because it's kind of protected. It's the original set of files. So this is the one thing about working online just here is, in reality, when you're doing this work, you would have Python and Jupyter Notebook and Tweetbee installed on your machine, so then you can start saving to a file on your machine all the information you downloaded. So this bit of code, will run. It will kind of create a file called this, using the online server that we're using, but unfortunately there's no way of getting that and downloading it to your machine just now. So just bear that in mind. We're using this online service for kind of teaching purposes, but when you're doing this yourself, you'll have everything installed on your machine, so you can then save and manipulate files much more easily. So that's just how you would save the information that we've downloaded. We can also kind of put it into a more familiar data format. So at the moment we've got a data format which is a list. So we've got square brackets, and then each element of the list is kind of like 3 separate fields itself, which are kind of analogous to rows or observations. We can just make that explicit. We can say, right, actually shape the data into what we're typically kind of familiar with, where every column is a variable and every row is an observation. So this is where we use the pandas Python module, which in shorthand we've called PD. So using the pandas module, use the data frame method, so create a data set basically containing the RNLI data we created earlier. Call our data set df. This is kind of standard Python terminology. It can be called whatever you want. And then give me a random sample of 5 observations from the data set. And this is how it looks. Now we're kind of, we've turned what's quite, kind of abstract or probably unfamiliar data formatting into something we're quite familiar with. But it's the exact same information that we've downloaded, and we've just kind of reformatted what we've done. So we've asked for a random sample. So here is row 63, which contains a tweet from Friday, January 15, 2021, and then we've got a preview of the content fields. Obviously there's quite a lot of content. And then what we can do again is, if we were doing this on our machine, if we had a folder called data, we can create a file called this, a CSV file, and we can spit out the data set to that file. Excellent. So, thank you for bearing with me through the IT issues, unfortunately. That's a very kind of, reasonably quick tour of the Twitter API. As I said, there's a webinar, which is again about an hour long, where I actually show you how you can sign up to the Twitter API. I run through this example here, but not in as much detail, and I cover some kind of next steps and some further learning. But hopefully today was worth it for kind of going reasonably line by line, taking our time, saying this is what's happening at every stage, showing you how the data looks when you ask Twitter for data, and how we can then kind of repackage it into something a bit more familiar. As I said, this online notebook is available whenever you need it, using the link that we've sent, or again, as I showed earlier, we've got the UK Data Service GitHub repository containing all the open source free materials that we've developed for other courses. So again, the social network analysis one has all the code that we use today. It's got a reading list as well if you want to do some further reading, and a lot of these books as well are actually open access. Some aren't, but some are, which is quite good. Some suggestions for learning Python, etc. So I will take some questions if you post them to YouTube. What I will do, just to prove that we're in real time once more, and this again can backfire, is let's do our search again for my name. this time, 20 minutes later. So you can see that we've got some new search results, because I think this was the first tweet before. So now you can see there's been more tweets containing my first name, none of them about me, thankfully, but again, lots of Japanese tweets about that anime or manga character, and I need to ask somebody about that. Never check that out. So excellent. So that was our whistle stop kind of coding demo of the Twitter API. So thank you very much. Hopefully you found that useful, even the kind of troubleshooting I needed to do. So I'll take some questions just now, if that's okay. So I'll just take a look at the YouTube chat. Going forward, you'll be able to contact UK Data Service. So we've got a help email account, which I'm sure Julia can post for you just now. Obviously, you've been contacted by us, so you'll have the UK Data Services details. I know I've left, so technically it's easy now, if that's okay. So I'll just say this, but you can contact the team. I'm sure they're very helpful, very willing to talk to you about your individual project. Excellent. And apologies, just looking at some of the questions, it did look like I was speaking a bit quietly. I do have a baby who's asleep for some of this, so apologies. I can turn up the sound next time. So I'll keep an eye on the YouTube chat just now if you want to post a question. If you don't, as I say, the UK Data Service will be more than happy to field your queries about social network analysis and some ideas for further training as well, because we're very keen on progressing work in this area. Yes, Julia, you did all get the weird volume, because I actually turned on the live stream on my machine myself, which had this weird Inception echo thing going on, because obviously I'm broadcasting from my machine. Also, I prefer crunchy peanut butter. Thank you, Julia. Though, if it's a question of smooth or crunchy peanut butter versus something else, I would choose something else, if that's a better question. Thank you. So again, if there are no questions, then hopefully you found that very useful. Critical comments are just as welcome as praiseful comments, so please let us know, because we've got, if I'm right, Julia, we've got another year or possibly even 2 years of working in this area, so there's plenty of good training coming up, so please let Julia and the team know about your needs and your ideas and your critical comments. That would be fantastic. So I'll leave that from me just now, so thank you very much. I was going to say I've been great, I haven't, you've been great, but thank you very much, and hopefully